Any other media that needed news release? We good? All right.
This is a report if anybody needs one too.
Okay.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you for coming. I'm Tom Schweik, Missouri State Auditor. Today I'm going to be delivering the audit of the Kansas City 33 School District. Wanted to start out by making a couple of introductions. We have with us CPA Todd Schuler, who is the audit manager, who's here, who maybe can help answer some of your questions. And Julie Molden, who is the auditor in charge, is also here with me today, along with Vanessa Chandler, our Director of Communications, and she can answer any follow-up questions. If you have other things you want to talk about after the audit delivery is over, she can arrange for interviews, as well as Gary McAleer, who served me well for the last year. This is his last audit delivery before he moves back into the private sector. The audit that we did of the Kansas City schools was done under the 2008 statute that gives the state auditor's office the discretion to audit school districts without the need of a petition. We thought it was time, in light of all that was going on, to do another audit of the district. We released the audit in two parts. First, we released an audit on the financial condition last year, and then this report contains other findings related to the way the district uses its public funds. I wanted to start out by saying, I know I read the paper and I follow the issues in the school district pretty closely. There have been a lot of issues relative to the superintendent, the board of directors, as well as the issue of accreditation. Our audit really does not cover those issues. It's really a separate and distinct matter. Our job is to determine if public funds and official spending are proper in accordance with laws, regulations, district policies, and sound financial practices. And that's what I'm going to focus on today as we deliver this audit. We audited the fiscal year ending June 30th, 2010. We've been in the field for several months. I will comment on some things that happened before then as they're relevant to that fiscal year, and on some things that happened since then that involve improving the situation. But the center of our audit was the fiscal year that ended June 30th, 2010. We spent 2,500 hours, audit hours. That doesn't even include my time or management time. Actual in the field audit hours on this audit. It's one of our larger audits that we've done in this year. And we think that we have some very substantial and concrete results to report to you today. We did not find any incident of fraud except for one. As you all know, the former principal of Lincoln College Preparatory Academy, a magnet school, was indicted for felony theft for stealing over $58,000. Our audit does explain how that happened and why it happened in our view, and we understand that's being pursued by the appropriate authorities. Other than that, we did not find any instances of outright fraud or theft, and that's good news. We find those frequently when we audit school districts and counties. My audit approach is to be a constructive one, to provide guidance for improvement, and we work very well with the school district in conducting this audit. You know, one of the first things we look at when we do an audit is the subject of the audit cooperating. Because when they're not cooperating, that's usually a sign that they have something to hide or have some sort of dislike for oversight. We did not find that in the Kansas City School District. We found that all members of the district were totally cooperative with our audit. They've taken our audit recommendations seriously. They've agreed to implement them. And we think this is sort of a model for how a proper audit should work. We come in, they view us as somebody who can help them improve the district, and they've taken our recommendations to heart. I implemented a grading system when I started out as Missouri State Auditor, because what had happened in previous audits were people who liked the results of the audit would take little pieces out of context. Sometimes people who didn't like it or didn't like the subject of the audit would take things out of context, and we found that often the characterization that was made of our audits really didn't reflect what was in the audit report. So we started a system 10 or 11 months ago of grading everybody either with an excellent, a good, fair, or a poor. And we think that's made people more responsive, and it's allowed media and other people who are reporting on it to get an accurate characterization of the audit that we're doing. In this case, we rated the district fair, which is kind of like a C if you were a teacher grading a student. But it's a little misleading because I think if we had done this audit a year ago, it would have been a poor, and based on the improvements we're seeing going forward, it probably would be a good or better. We see an overall positive trend in the district toward improvement. We were very impressed with some of the actions that are taken, and I suspect if the district keeps to its commitment to implementing the recommendations we made, continuing the fiscal practices they put in place over the past couple of years, we will see continuous improvement in the district. So this is not a bad news story. We think there has been improvement, and we were impressed with the procedures and processes that the district is putting in place to improve accountability. I'm going to talk now about the specific findings of the audit. Some of these are negative. I'll also discuss what the school district has agreed to do to improve those and where we see it going from there. Our first finding relates to competitive bidding on service contracts. We did find that the district, during the period we audited and earlier, had issued some contracts without soliciting requests for proposals. Some contracts either did not provide for oversight, or there were performance criteria in the contract that were not met or not checked on to see if they were being met. We found some contracts that should have been in writing that were not. We found some contract modifications that should have been in writing but were not. We feel that competitive bidding and more effective contract oversight would help the district improve its financial conditions. So, for example, the district did not seek proposals when contracting for the following services: after-school program, reading curriculum development, human resources management, computer installation, and transportation or food services. This district also has used the same outside legal counsel for 20 years without soliciting proposals from other firms to try to make them more competitive. I know, having been a lawyer in private practice, that when there's competition, you do reduce your rates. So it would be a good idea to do competitive bidding on all contracts, including service contracts. We also found lack of monitoring in the case of some contracts. In some cases, as I said, the contract didn't have monitoring criteria, and generally, in the best-run school districts that we audit, there are almost always performance criteria in the contracts. In other contracts, there were monitoring criteria, but they were not adhered to or checked on. I'll give you a couple of examples. The contract for the K-12 African-Centered Education Program contained very few performance criteria, and the contractor did not submit quarterly financial reports or detailed invoices, which were actually required by the contract. In the case of the Alternative Education and Human Resources Department management contracts, they did provide ways for the district to monitor and measure the contractor's performance, but we found the district was remiss in actually doing that monitoring. We think that is being changed and improving right now. The Student Violence and Gang Prevention Services and Transportation Services contracts also did not provide for any performance measures. We also noted in the audit that the district lost more than $2 million a year from 2007 to 2010 on food service operations. We felt that that contract was not adequately monitored, and the contractor did not hold parents accountable for delinquent invoices and meal providing. So people who just didn't pay their bills were not followed up on. As to written contracts, we found that the district did not have signed contracts in the files with providers of computer installation and setup. They did not have signed contracts with providers of student violence and gang prevention services. And then in cases where there were written contracts, in some cases there were amendments made that were also not in writing. So, for example, with the African-Centered Education Program, asbestos remediation and environmental cleanup, elevator repair and maintenance, and food services management, there were written contracts, but there were modifications and payments made under those contracts that were not documented formally in accordance with proper contracting procedures. Our recommendation is that, pretty obvious, that the board solicit proposals for these contracts where they haven't solicited proposals, that they ensure there are appropriate performance criteria in those contracts, and that when there are performance criteria in the contracts, that they actually check and make sure those performance criteria have been met. The board has agreed to implement those recommendations. They have indicated that in 2010 the district implemented mandatory quarterly meetings for large and multi-year vendor contracts, which we think is a very positive development. Small vendor contracts are monitored by the relevant department, and there are annual vendor evaluations required, and we think those are positive steps. As I said, we wanted to ensure that contracts are signed and modifications are legal. We have been told that the legal procurement staff are now ensuring that all contracts are signed, and that there will not be large modifications to those contracts without a written signed modification. Exactly what we asked for, and they've committed to doing that. I want to talk a little bit about disbursements. The student incentive program from 2008 to 2010 cost nearly $2 million. These were gift cards were given for electronic equipment, or awards were given to students to try to improve performance. And we are not education experts. We don't judge whether giving an iPod to a student is going to improve a test score. That's way beyond our purview. What we do is try to make sure that there's accountability in those programs, that the money is followed and tracked, and we know it wasn't wasted or put to bad use. As I said, between 2008 and 2010, the district spent nearly $2 million on student incentives. There were no procedures or after-the-fact monitoring to ensure they were given to students, and we found that to be problematic. Similarly, there was a lot of money being spent on food, for different meetings and things. I mean, hundreds of thousands of dollars being spent on food, and we found there was not adequate monitoring as to who was at those meetings, why all this money had to be spent on food, and there was no way to see whether providing those meals, which were a lot of money, was really providing any benefit to the district. Let me talk a little bit more detail about both of those issues. First, with respect to the incentives, the district purchased trophies, gift cards, sporting event, amusement park tickets, and electronics, but we did not find documentation to make sure they were actually distributed to the students. We don't really know what happened to all that stuff, and if you're going to have an incentive program, it needs to be very, very carefully monitored. In 2009, when the district eliminated procurement cards, which was a major way that these gifts were distributed, which teachers and administrators would use the procurement cards to buy things for the students. As soon as they eliminated the procurement cards, the expenditures dropped 24%, over $200,000 was saved. And then in 2010, another 74% drop, over $520,000 saved. As I said, we don't offer opinions on whether these incentives are a good idea, but they need to be more carefully monitored. We are impressed with the way the district has brought those costs under control, reduced them substantially, and we feel they're now used for appropriate purposes, and the district has assured us that those types of gifts and incentives for students will be more carefully monitored in the future. So that's really a story that's part of the past of this district, not part of the present, and we're impressed with the way they've handled it. On food and meals, that was the second thing I talked about. Between 2008 and 2010, the district spent $2 million providing food and meals. I'm not talking about what the students eat in the cafeteria, I'm talking about for special meetings and things like that. $2 million on non-travel food and meals. And there was very little documentation maintained as to why that kind of money, which we think is very high by normal school district standards. But fortunately, also in 2009, when the district eliminated the procurement cards, it reduced the amount expended by 16% the first year. That's over $145,000 reduced. And another 58% in 2010, $448,000 reduction. So what we're seeing is a very sharp downward trend in the amount of money that's spent for meals. Now, we understand, and the board pointed out, that sometimes in order to get parents to attend a particular kind of meeting, you're going to want to serve a little food. We're not saying, again, we don't tell people how to do their job, that you should never serve food. Our point is if you're going to be spending large amounts of money on food, it's got to be documented why it was there, what the meeting was for, who attended, that you got a good price for the food, as you may have been reading some things going on at the federal level where people are paying like $16 for a donut. We want to make sure that stuff isn't happening. We had no indication it was happening here, but we know it happens elsewhere, and we didn't have the documentation. Again, though, I don't think it's a bad news story. While we felt that that was a lot of money without documentation in past years, we've seen a marked effort to reduce the amount of expenditures and to document what's being done with that money and why the food expenditures are necessary. So it's a story that started out bad, and again, like so much that we saw in the audit, is moving toward improvement. Let me talk a little bit about capital assets and surplus property. Obviously, when you close a lot of schools, a lot of property gets moved around, and there's a tremendous opportunity for fraud, waste, abuse, and corruption. When property is being moved around, it's so easy for people just to take that property. So it's very important that the documentation of excess property and capital assets is very, very thorough, even more so when you're in a school closing mode than in a traditional operational mode. We found that the district did maintain an excessive amount of surplus property, probably could have gotten rid of more sooner. It was not adequately tracked, and we feel that there needs to be some improvements in that area. And again, the district has made 100% commitment to do those improvements and has actually started implementing those, which I'll talk about in a minute. The first thing we noted in starting the audit was that the district does not have a complete and accurate list of surplus property. It did not fully alert other schools that this property is available, so they might be buying things that are available from other schools as surplus property. So we hope and expect that there will be a better effort to let people know what's available, which we think can save the school district hundreds of thousands of dollars. There's a former school building that's used for storage, and it contains a lot of surplus furniture and equipment. Some of it's obsolete, but some of it is not obsolete. There was an online auction held February 2011 to dispose of some of the property, which we think is a positive development, but it was the first surplus sale in 5 years. And generally, when you're disposing of surplus property, especially in a really large district like this one, it should probably occur more than once every 5 or 6 years. Unused buildings. The school district maintains 38 closed schools and 7 vacant lots. We believe those are worth about $49 million. The district pays $2.2 million in utilities and insurance for the closed schools during the year ending June 30th of this year, 2011. We understand the district plans to retain about 8 of those buildings for future use, and the rest really should be disposed of as soon as possible to realize maximum revenue for the school. Now again, to the school's credit, there are some restrictions on the ability to dispose of property. The district cannot, for example, the Kansas City, Missouri School District Building Corporation has to approve some of the sales, and in some cases there's bond indenture documents on these buildings that require the buildings be sold to another not-for-profit, which of course reduces their value. So we understand, again, that the district has significant obstacles in selling these properties, but would encourage the school to sell them as quickly as possible and realize the revenue as best they can. The district did indicate that in January of this year, they hired somebody whose job it is now to coordinate the repurposing of the closed schools and the selling of surplus property. Let's talk a little bit about the inventory. As I said, property movement procedures exist, but we found they were not always followed. So the capital asset lists that the district has are not accurate, and many assets cannot be fully accounted for. So, for example, the 2010 annual physical inventory, it was performed in 58 buildings. It included 56,600 items. It took 8 months to complete. The district paid, I think, a vendor about $25,000 to do that. 36 locations, and it took about 2 months per location. So that it's clear the district is committed to handling this property favorably. They did find that 4,420 items, about 8%, worth $2.6 million could not be located, and that's problematic because that's a lot of money the school could realize. We did not see that there was a thorough or accountable investigation into missing items, and some of these were really useful items, not like old furniture that can't be, nothing, you can't do anything with it, but for example, computers, cameras, electronic equipment. A lot of the missing property does have value. It's possible they're at another district site, but procedures weren't followed, and we really don't know what happened to it, and that means that there's certainly the opportunity for theft. We're not saying there was theft. What we're saying is there's a lot of valuable items that could not be tracked or located, and they're worth about $2.6 million. Give you an example of one problematic issue, small, but indicative of what happens when inventory is not properly taken care of. Copiers. Copiers are expensive. They always are a big line item for individual schools. We found that there were 14 copiers listed as being at 5 of the closed schools, good copiers sitting in closed schools. The district found that 3 of them moved to another building, 2 were closed at the school, 9 were in storage. The district was actually making lease payments on 9 copiers that were in storage. This is the kind of thing we auditors look at. I mean, it sounds minor, but there's an area where there can be a clear savings of money with no cost to the district whatsoever. So we ask that the district maintain and make available to schools a list of surplus property, properly dispose of unusable items, and keep good track of what they have. The board responded to this recommendation very favorably, said they've been working on transferring property from closed schools, auctioning off surplus property, and they've hired an inventory company to track the assets. They're also overseeing the transformation of closed schools, and there's some issues with how you get rid of schools based on the bond indentures, as I said, but they're working on that as well. We recommended that timely and physical annual inventories be conducted. The board responded that all inventories will now be conducted by a third party to improve timeliness. And they pointed out that when you close 30 schools, it's really tough to maintain inventory, and I understand that. The response of the board was very honest. I'll quote, "The massive amount of movement of property during a short time did not allow for a comprehensive and orderly inventory of property movement." So, I mean, first you got to acknowledge a problem before you fix it. The school district has acknowledged the problem and is committed to fixing the problem as well. Another thing we thought was very favorable was the use of technology to track technology. Beginning in 2010, the school district began utilizing technology tracking and monitoring options, such as asset recovery software that's actually put in the computer or whatever, that allows it to be tracked. And I think that's very important, and that really prevents misuse and a very positive development. The board also is reevaluating its copier policies and reducing the number of leased copiers from 282 to 125. So while we found problems with the tracking of inventory and the way it was disposed of, we recognize it occurred within the context of closing a lot of schools, and the board has committed to improving those practices and procedures and doing their inventories more often than every 6 years. I want to talk a little bit about the board and the way it conducts its meetings. This is probably the most common finding we find when we audit school districts, which is the sunshine laws. You and the media are very sensitive to the fact that meetings can only be closed under certain circumstances. And what we found here was the votes and the reasons for going into closed session in the Kansas City School District Board meetings were not always properly stated. What's required is, if you're going to go into closed session, you've got to document the reason in open session so everybody understands why you went into closed session. And in this particular case, that was not always done. And that we also found that closed meeting discussions were not always limited to allowable topics. Most of the time, the vast majority of the time, the proper procedures were followed, but there were some sunshine law violations, and we're hoping that will be improved. We found some conflicts of interest as well, and that's a very important issue. There's a state law against nepotism and conflicts of interest. Prior to June of 2010, the board required members to submit a statement of interest if any board member had a substantial personal or private interest in something that was being decided by the board. But the members were not prohibited from voting on the matter. Usually if you have a conflict of interest, you have to recuse yourself. That procedure did not exist prior to June 2010. That procedure does exist now. A couple of examples. At the time, the Mid-America Regional Council, MARC, is that how you pronounce it? MARC, was approved by a school board member who was actually employed by the MARC. That's the kind of thing you've got to avoid. And there was a similar problem with the African-Centered Education Program. In 2010, June, the board adopted a policy that requires annual disclosure of involvement with any individual entity that might present a conflict of interest. We think that that needs to include a requirement to abstain from any vote on that issue as well. Our recommendations, again, would be pretty obvious, flowing from the results of the audit. Please ensure that the votes and reasons for closing meetings are announced publicly and documented in the open minutes, and limit closing meetings to the discussion of allowable topics. The board said they will work hard to do that, and to avoid conflicts of interest. And now we're going to have, according to the board, more stringent conflict of interest requirements. We think a recusal requirement is a good addition as well. We're not sure they've committed to that, and hope that they will do that. Personnel issues, this is also a related issue on conflicts of interest. The board policy says the superintendent shall not allow the district to operate without sufficient written rules and processes that would avoid, they have to avoid a conflict of interest and prevent nepotism. New employees are not required to identify current district employees to whom they're related. The district does not maintain a list of related parties. We think that needs to be done. Another area we thought there could be significant improvement in the district is overtime policy. We have found, as we do audits across the state, that one of the quickest ways millions of dollars can be saved in a large state or local operations through a more careful monitoring of overtime. Prior to fiscal year 2010, overtime was not monitored by the Kansas City School District. As a result, in 2008, there was $2.9 million spent on overtime, and in 2009, $2.5 million spent on overtime. We found individual examples, and I'm just going to cite one. For example, a foreman who received $56,000 in overtime in 2009, $30,000 in overtime in 2010, and had a salary of just over $40,000. So you're talking about somebody who in 1 year received actually more than the base salary in overtime, and in another year close to the base salary in overtime. Now that pre-approval is required, we think that will help. And in 2010, fiscal year 2010, overtime got to $1 million. So it went from almost $3 million to $2.5 million down to $1 million. This is exactly the type of positive trending we'd like to see, and it's a sign that the district is taking the recommendation seriously and recognizing that overtime management can be a source of great savings to a district that has some financial issues. So obviously we recommended that they establish procedures to verify and update related party information. They're going to do that. Perform a cost analysis to determine whether hiring additional employees is better than overtime. They're doing that. And the new overtime policy put into place, as I said, reduced overtime last year to $1.1 million. And from what I understand from talking to members of the financial staff here and the CFO, it's going to be probably only about $500,000 this year. So it's going to be cut in half again. This is very good fiscal accountability. When you can reduce your overtime in the course of 3 years from $3 million to $500,000, that's $2.5 million that goes to student education. And that's exactly the kind of improvement we'd like to see. Accounting controls. Obviously, accounting controls became an issue. As I mentioned at the beginning of this presentation, the former principal of Lincoln College Preparatory Academy, a local magnet school, has now been indicted for stealing over $58,000 from student activity funds. Now, this money was supposed to go for students to do basketball and other activities that they do, and somebody in the school district, at least according to the indictment, stole it. Now that has not been proven, and I'm a former defense lawyer, so I don't judge guilt, but there is an indictment outstanding. One thing we can say is that more effective accounting controls and monitoring probably could have avoided this problem. And this is something, again, that's common. We've found now, I think, 5 cases of embezzlement across the state in the 10 months that I've been auditor, and usually it's a direct result of ineffective monitoring, bank reconciliations, accounting controls. What happened here was the bank actually contacted the district to point out that the student activity fund had a negative balance. That's how the school found out about it. We like people to be a little more proactive in that, in this particular case. So, for example, we found that bank reconciliations had not been performed in a timely manner. Now, you and I, when we write our checks and keep our checkbook and we get the bank statement, we compare the two. That's really all a bank reconciliation is, and we felt that could have been done in a more effective manner. This, again, is in the past. We think that now the improvements have been put in place to do more timely bank reconciliations. We're a little perplexed that the former principal who's been indicted for allegedly embezzling $58,000 has been hired as a site administrator for a contractor in the district, but that's really something the district has to decide how you treat somebody that's under indictment. That was kind of surprising to us. We found when we did bank reconciliations, there were discrepancies. There weren't major discrepancies, $1,000 here, $1,000 there. But again, better bank reconciliation prevents embezzlement and means more money going to the students. Textbook procedures. The district does not adequately account for textbook inventories. You're talking about, textbooks, sounds like you're talking about something small, but you're talking about over $4 million a year in expenditures on textbooks, which means those inventories have to be monitored just as closely as computers and electronic equipment. We found that textbooks are managed individually at each school. There appeared to be no formal textbook policy and procedures. Annual inventories were not carefully documented, and there were definite problems with students who had misused the textbook policy as well. We can read about more in the audit. Our recommendation was very simple: establish uniform written policies and procedures detailing the duties and responsibilities of the textbook coordinator and administration at each school to make sure that people are charged for property that is not properly returned. The board has responded by saying they're replacing the student record system software, which will increase student accountability and be much better at tracking the enforcement of these procedures. Again, it's nice to go in and do an audit, find a problem, and see people who are committed to improving the situation. We had some issues with transportation costs, the busing issue, but this is an issue where accountability and money has to be balanced against student safety and that situation. For example, the state only requires that free transportation be provided to students who live more than 3.5 miles away. The district has decided to provide free transportation to people who live 1.5 miles away. Now, there may be perfectly reasonable reasons for that, preventing truancy, getting kids to school. We understand that. We don't audit that. All we point out is that by having a more liberal policy than the state requires, it is costing the district money. But we're not going to be too critical of that. That really is a business decision you all have to make. We simply point out where savings can occur. Here's an area where savings can occur. Similarly, the district reduced, as part of the consolidation, the bell times from 3 to 2. Reducing bell times increases costs because you need more buses. We pointed out that could save the district millions of dollars by going back to 3 bells. But I'm not really here to second guess the reason. I mean, my understanding is the reason the bell time were changed has to do with student safety and making sure people are not sitting at bus stops for long periods of time. And it's a cost-benefit analysis. We point out that there would be a way to save money relative to the busing program. It could save millions of dollars. We leave it to the district to provide a cost-benefit analysis. Our biggest concern is when a decision is made to increase costs over what is necessary, we expect to see in the file a cost-benefit analysis. And our only real criticism here was there wasn't a cost-benefit analysis. Had there been an analysis saying, yes, it's going to cost us $4 million a year, but based on school districts around the country, we're going to have less instances of truancy, we're going to have less instances of people being robbed at bus stops. If there was some sort of a study to justify the increased cost, we wouldn't even have had a finding in the audit. Our problem was a decision was made relative to the busing program to increase costs by millions of dollars over what's necessary, and there was no explanation in the file as to why that was done. So all we recommend is either adopt the cheaper way to do it or document more carefully why you're doing it in the more expensive manner. Financial condition. I'm going to finish up with that because it's a good news story. The district finances were in very poor condition when we issued the audit last year, and we wanted people to know that. so that improvements could be made. We've now, and we understand why the financial condition was so bad. A lot of it's really beyond the control of the district. Significantly decreased funding from the state, declining student population, declining property values, which we're all experiencing across the country, and increased enrollment in charter schools really hurt the district financially, and that's not something that really can be changed. It just has to be adapted to. And what we also pointed, that spending needs to be reduced. And since then, of course, there have been school closings, reconstituting 29 buildings, eliminating 900 full-time equivalent positions, renegotiating of several key contracts, and as a result of these really tough measures, which I imagine some people took some heat for around here, and I understand that, the result has been a very clear improvement in the financial condition of the school district. The revenue situation has stabilized, expenditures have been reduced by over $9 million over the past 2 years, and we project that for the first year since we've been doing audits over the past several years, the school's balance, which had been going down, school district's balance, which had been going down every year, is actually going to increase this year. You're going to end the school year with more money than you started. And we think a positive cash flow is a very good sign. This just needs to be seen through, and the continued accountability needs to occur. As I said at the beginning, I'm not involved in accreditation issues. This audit has nothing to do with the loss of accreditation that occurred recently. It's just an odd coincidence that occurred at the time of the delivery of this audit. And it doesn't relate to the various issues that have gone on with the personnel of the school board and the superintendent's office. But what I can say is that the measures that are being taken by this district to improve financial accountability, improve financial control are real, they're solid, they're substantial, they will make more funds available to students, and as long as everybody in this district is committed to seeing it through, I think you're going to see a positive trend financially for this district, not a negative one. That ends my formal remarks today, and I'm happy to answer any questions you might have. Thank you.
We'll do questions from the media here.
Why is this audit, I know you touched on it at the very end, but why is this audit important to parents or students? Why should they care about this?
Well, that's a good question. Parents and students want the most funding available for the direct education of their students. And when there's money being wasted on contracts that are not competitively bid, when incentives are being given out and no one knows if they're actually going to the students, there's no indication that that money is actually effectively educating the students. What we're finding is that the cost control measures that are being implemented are freeing up money for education, and that's why parents should be concerned about it.
Do you have any dollar amounts about that? Like how few dollars were spent per pupil versus now because of this savings? Do you have
I have a chart which I can provide you, which shows that every year for the past several years, there was less money in the bank at the end of the year than at the beginning of the year. So less and less money was available for education. And it will show that this year, if projections are met, there will actually be an increase in revenue available to educate students. So I can give you that, where you can look at the macro level, how there was money declining for student education, and now it will be increasing as a result of the changes that were made.
But you don't have anything per pupil?
Not for people, no.
Let's go.
So the same sort of idea, there are several mentions in here of the district could have saved this much money if they did this. Have you sort of added those up to see how much savings you think that, how much money was maybe being overspent at one point?
We haven't added it up, but you can actually, the numbers are in the report, so you can just add it up yourself, or if you want us to help you do it, we can get somebody to help you with that. We've never added up to come with all different areas, procurement, and we've never added up how much money was saved, but the numbers are all in the report, and it is many millions of dollars.
And can I ask one more thing?
Sure.
This whole idea of the district has made so much improvement, and if you were doing this report now, you give them a better range. I mean, can you talk a little bit more about what's been like the upward trend on the management of the?
Well, what we look at is fiscal responsibility. What we look at is the district doing everything it can to cut down on its administrative costs so there's more money available for education. And if you read through this report, you can see that while it's been obviously very painful to lay off people and close schools, what that has had the net effect of is saving money. Reducing overtime, it saves money. Over $1 million, it was $2.5 million, almost $3 million worth of overtime, now it's $500,000. That's $2.5 million right there when we do our addition that you want to do, which we can help you with. You're going to see $2.5 million worth of savings right there, and that's money that's available now to educate students. So I think there's a direct relationship between the cost savings we found and the ability to improve education, as painful as some of these cuts are.
Auditor, how would you characterize the amount of spending on food and meals? Would you use the word excessive?
I think at one point it was clearly excessive, and excessive because it's just a lot of money, it was millions of dollars. but we didn't know what it was being spent for. If you can show me that in order to get parents to come into a really critical meeting about educating their students, we got to serve coffee and muffins, well, then we understand it. The problem we had is we saw $2 million worth of expenditures and no documentation of what it was used for. But what we've also seen now is a dramatic decrease in the amount of food expenditures that the district is doing, which suggests it's being more carefully done, and also it's being documented. Why did we need to bring in this meal? Why did we need to pay for these meals, coffee, whatever? And so it's
And based on your experience here, with regard to tracking the surplus property, how would you characterize how this district performed during the time of your audit?
Well, I mean, we thought it was inadequate, but we also understood that it's hardest to track property when you're closing a lot of buildings and moving a lot of things around. So they were under the most distressed property management situation, but there was still, what was it, 8% that was not tracked? That's a lot. That's a lot.
Let's go right.
Is there any assessment, I mean, there was lots of talk about controls that need to be put in place, and monitoring that needs to be done, but is there any assessment on how much that would cost and compared to the amount of money that they're losing by not?
Yeah, we did look, and the audit points they're paying $24,000 to this vendor, or $30,000. It lists what the costs are, and in every case, we thought the cost of the vendor was worth it. If you look at the benefit that vendors achieved for the district, we did not see hiring a lot of outside consultants and contractors that were wasteful. And quite frankly, we're looking at other school districts where they just load up a district with consultants and contractors. We don't know what they do, and it seems like a big waste of money. And we'd be the first person to say if we thought the use of outside services was actually detrimental to the financial health of the district. But we didn't see that here.
Auditor, you talk in the conflict of interest section here, and you said you're not sure that this district is committed to recusal. Can you elaborate on that?
Well, right. It looks like the response we got, and I'll let the district speak for itself on this, based on the responses we got, they're going to be more rigorous in having people identify the existence of conflict of interest. So if they have a financial interest in a decision that's going to go before the board, there are more rigorous requirements now to disclose those. But we think that means you don't vote either on the issue. And we haven't quite gotten a firm commitment on that issue. We hope we will.
Are you satisfied with the way they've handled the ARA funds?
There's a lot of error money that came in here. I have my own views, which I won't go into great detail on the problem with error funds is if you use it for annual costs, once the money runs out, you're really just extending the cliff. And some of that went on here, some of that goes on with all that error money, where basically what happens is you say, okay, we can hire this teacher now for another 2 years because of the error money. Well, then when the 2 years runs out, unless you found savings, you got to get rid of the teacher. We like to see error money used for items that are sustainable. And when they're used for unsustainable items, it's problematic. A little bit of that occurred here. But I'm not going to get into philosophical issue on error. If you look at our single audit that we do every year, that will have a lot more to say about that.
Anybody else?
Thank you. I really enjoyed it. Again, I think the district's committed to improvement, and we appreciate your coming here and all the cooperation of the district.
Just so you know,
Here, 2015. I'm in the whole box over there.